There we go. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Hogmolly Hustle. We've been away for a couple of weeks. Thanksgiving was a great time. Got to spend time with family and stuff, so definitely don't regret it. If we do have any viewers, I apologize you didn't get to see our faces over that. I hope you got to see your family and all these good things. Had some good football over the past 2 weeks. We can't talk about them all, obviously. But there were some big developments. And this week, we have a pretty big college episode. A lot of big things happen in college. A lot of coaching changes. A lot of big games that people may not have expected at the beginning of the season. Some big shape-ups in the top 10, top 4. Some potential big shake-ups that didn't come through. Then we got some games to look forward to in the upcoming week. So, first off, the biggest game probably in all of football. Now, if the Iron Ball had ended differently, maybe that would have been the biggest one. But Michigan beating Ohio State might be one of the biggest wins in a few years, honestly. You think about it, Harbaugh, as much success as he has had at Michigan, has not been able to beat Ohio State. And many people, including myself, thought, well, at what point do they replace him? He's been so successful, but you got to beat Ohio State. Otherwise, you can't go any further. People thought, would he go back into the NFL? Would he change schools? What's the idea here? But that team, that Michigan team, is a hard-nosed team. They have sent a few offensive linemen to the NFL in the past few years. Hard-nosed, Michael Onwenu, for one of them. He's a stud. Big, run-blocking, hard-nosed, a good zone-blocking scheme. They're going to run down your throats. They're tough. It's a really good program, and I think that this big, key signature win over Ohio State is huge for Harbaugh and huge for Michigan. And, of course, one of your guys dominated in that game.
Absolutely. You talked about being hard-nosed and just a tough football team. If you watch Michigan play, a couple things jump off the page to you, and for me, it's the edge rushers. It's Hutchinson more so than anything. Hutchinson had 15 pressures against Ohio State. I mean, that's unheard of. It's not like Ohio State is a cupcake. He was in the backfield the entire day. I agree with you that I think that this is a very pivotal moment in Harbaugh's career. If he were to have lost to Ohio State and to have missed the college football playoff, it wouldn't surprise me one bit if Michigan joined the masses of many other college football programs that are looking to replace their good head coach with someone who they think is better, someone who they think is great and can take them to levels that the others haven't. And so getting that win against Ohio State, it's his first win against Ohio State since he became the head coach at Michigan, has to feel good. I saw videos of Michigan fans crying in joy. It's one of the best rivalries in American sports. And, I'm super thrilled for Harbaugh. I know that it meant a lot to him. And it really sets up for a spicy college football Saturday this weekend. Championship Saturday. You got Michigan versus Iowa in the Big Ten championship game. I'm really looking forward to that matchup. And so Michigan has a legitimate shot at making the playoff for the first time, correct? Wouldn't this be the first year that they've made it?
Yep, they're in the top 4 right now. So
if Michigan wins Saturday, beats Iowa, and they go on to make the CFB, it's hard to think that Michigan would replace Harbaugh at that point. I mean, how could you fire a guy that took you to the playoff and beat Ohio State the way that they did?
Yep. Well, I think that also it's important because right now, and of course things could change, but odds are it probably just flip-flop. And I don't like the way that the rankings are right now because if you look at them, Georgia at the top, I do think they are the best team right now. I think they are a legitimate stud field team. Number 2 is Michigan. Number 3 is Cincinnati. Number 4 is Alabama. I don't like that the way it is. And I hope that that changes depending on how that SEC championship goes. And you have to ask, if Alabama loses in that championship, are they out?
I think it depends on a lot of factors. I see a scenario where they would be out. For example, if Bama loses to Georgia, they are now a two-loss team, but one of those losses is to Georgia, which by our account is basically losing to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Um, and Oklahoma State beats Baylor, so they're now a one-loss team who won their conference championship. That would put them above Bama in my eyes. If Michigan beats Iowa, and they're a one-loss team and a conference champion, then that would put them above Bama in my eyes. If Cincinnati wins and they're undefeated, they're obviously going to get in instead of Bama. And then, of course, Georgia would be undefeated as well. So there are scenarios where Bama loses this game and they are completely out. I also think that there's scenarios like if Baylor beats Oklahoma State and maybe Cincinnati fumbles the bag and loses to Houston in the championship game, then Bama might be able to make it in as a two-loss team. Because again, their two losses are at A&M, which is I think they're ranked 24th in the latest, the latest playoff ranking, and a neutral site game, championship game against Georgia, who, by all accounts, everything from statistics to the eye test, is the top dog, no pun intended, in college football this year. Georgia has one of the most dominant defenses I've seen in years. And so a question that I have for you, if Georgia was to lose this game to Bama, is there any chance that Georgia isn't the number one team, or do they have the number one seed basically on lock? Because I'm under the impression that even if Georgia loses to Bama by, say, a touchdown or two touchdowns, Georgia is still deserving of the top spot because their margin of victory, their defense is averaging giving up a single touchdown per game. And that's against SEC competition. I mean, they beat some really good teams. And some of the scores that have happened in those games are in garbage time whenever their second and third string are playing those games in the second half because they're up 3 or 4 touchdowns. So if they lose to Bama and it's not like Bama throttled them or walked the dog with them, I still have Georgia as the 1 seed. What do you think?
Well, you got to think it's weird to say lose a championship game and then still say the number 1 team, but you look at it, you can't just look at the wins because that Cincinnati's not the number 1 team. I think that if they go undefeated, they deserve to be in there, but they're not just on record alone the number 1 team. Michigan, I like them. Maybe you could say they could find their way to the number 1 spot. I don't know if I can see that. Maybe that has a better outcome if you could somehow end up with Alabama somehow staying in. Let's say Cincinnati fumbles the bag, Oklahoma State fumbles the bag, and you end up with Alabama and, I don't know, Notre Dame in the Final Four. Then maybe you could see possibly Alabama end up in the 4 spot, Georgia in the 2 spot. That would actually be a better outcome, I think, for the playoffs because that means that Georgia and Bama wouldn't be playing in the first round. So that'd be kind of cool. But there's a lot of things that got to happen because the way it's looking right now, I'm not sure what's going to happen. I mean, Oklahoma State, you bring them up. Notre Dame, Ohio State's right on the precipice. There's some teams that could hop Alabama if they happen to lose that championship game. So it's a very weird year. And you talked about how Alabama could miss the playoffs. I think that when you look at some of the teams that are in playoffs, I do think that Bama is probably better than Michigan. I think that even though there are some things that Bama is doing that they don't normally do as far as not being as effective in something, they're still studs. They got studs all over the field. There's no question about that. I think if they were to play Cincinnati, they'd wipe the floor with them. But you can't just disrespect Cincinnati and say, well, they're not as good as Bama and kick them out. You can't do that. That's not fair to them. Like we talk about this, how often does undefeated happen? It doesn't happen a lot. And they've played had a solid showing, and they have a pro prospect quarterback, too.
You have to reward Cincinnati for going out and scheduling a Notre Dame road game, walking into that stadium and being in the driver's seat from the first minute of that game, really. Cincinnati controlled the tone of that game for basically the entire day and beat Notre Dame on the road. And Notre Dame's a top 10 team. So if they do that and handle business in their conference, you cannot deny them that ability. Now, I do think that if Cincinnati makes it, I think that Cincinnati and Georgia both handle their business this weekend. If that's the case, then I think what the committee will do is give Cincinnati the 4 seed and make them the sacrificial lamb for Georgia in that first game of the CFP, so that they don't inherit the risk of having Cincinnati, Georgia in the national title game. Because talking about ratings and TV revenue, if you have Cincinnati and Georgia in the title game, I don't think that viewership will be what it would be if it was, say, Georgia, Michigan.
Yeah. Well, also, let's not act like last year's championship wasn't a shellacking as well. But you had some higher profile teams in there. So even with a shellacking, you had a lot of people tuning into that shellacking. But there is a lot to look at, and if you do change it around, that makes it better. I think the worst case scenario is Georgia-Bama in the first round. I think that just takes a lot of steam out. On the other hand, that means you have, presumably, Michigan at that point going to the championship versus either of those SEC teams, which, again, makes it look really nice for Harbaugh to finally get to that championship and possibly even win, depending on how things go. It would need to be a huge defensive game to win that. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Now, another one, I'm not the biggest Notre Dame fan. I'll go out and say that. There's been a lot of ACC, independent. There's a lot of reasons that I've always rooted against Notre Dame in the past. But given how things went with their coaching changes recently, I wouldn't mind seeing them make a run at the championship and have a chance to possibly even get to the championship after losing their head coach, the way that happened, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So there's a lot of things that factor into this. But the way things normally go, it wouldn't surprise me if Oklahoma State finds a way in if Alabama loses. And that is one that doesn't really have a great storyline, but they've had a really good season. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. It's a pretty big week.
I think that's what happens. I think that Oklahoma State's going to handle their business. Georgia's going to squeak out a win against Bama. Their defense is just way too good. And then Cincinnati handles their business, and I think it's going to be Georgia, Cincinnati is the 1 versus 4, and then some mixture of Michigan and Oklahoma State as the 2 and 3. And I think that sets up for a great CFB.
So you think that Cincinnati is going to drop down to 4 if they win, and Oklahoma State's going to jump them?
Yes, because Oklahoma State would be a 1-loss conference champion that has beat Baylor twice.
A top 10 Baylor now.
Exactly. And that win against Baylor that they already have is basically equal in the eyes of the Notre Dame win that Cincinnati has. So if you add another one of those, then I think they do leapfrog Cincinnati, especially, understanding the sport business side of this. The CFP wants to generate revenue. They want to bring in, it's all about the dollars. And so setting up Cincy, Georgia in the CFB in the round 1 instead of the championship game, it bodes well for ratings. It bodes well for TV revenue. And that's why I think that's kind of how they'll want to frame that.
I think if that's the route you're going, I think that makes sense because, of course, you can see the ads now. Undefeated versus undefeated. First round matchup. That's a great matchup, even though it might not be a great matchup. I mean, all things considered. again, you could say, well, what if Cincinnati makes it to the championship? What if they beat Michigan or whoever they end up facing if they didn't play Georgia in the first round? And then it's undefeated versus undefeated in the championship. But that means that they have to beat Michigan to get there. So there's a lot of things to look at. I don't know if I've been caught up with this Cincinnati bug this season. There's been people that have been crazy about them. I'm happy to see them have a successful season. Anytime somebody goes undefeated, I like to see it. But I don't know how well they'll fare against some of this competition in the playoffs. I'm glad to see them here. And
I've loaned my fanship to several different programs this season. You know, the Tar Heels haven't had the season that Mac Brown envisioned for them, and it started in week 1. So I've kind of divvied out loaned some of my fanship to other teams, and Cincinnati's one of them. Georgia's one of them. Georgia hasn't won a title in 40 years, so if Georgia wins the title, I'm cool with that. With Cincinnati, I think that if you put them as a 3 seed against a 2 seed Michigan, I would still pick Michigan to win that game if I were a betting man. But I think the chances of Cincinnati winning that game are a lot better, maybe twice, maybe double what they would be against beating Georgia. And so if you frame it to where Cincinnati is the 4 seed, then if they were to do the unthinkable and upset Georgia and advance to the national championship to play an Oklahoma State or a Michigan, then the ratings of that national championship game, with it being Cincinnati, are saved, because then everyone believes the hype and says, oh my God, Cincinnati just beat Georgia, who a lot of people say have this, colossal defense that is just unstoppable, unbeatable. If you put them in the 3 and 4 or the 2 and 3 spot and say Georgia handles their business against Oklahoma State, the 4 seed, and then Cincinnati squeaks out a win against Michigan, the 2 seed, and it's a Georgia-Cincinnati championship game, I do not think that the CFB would be pleased with the TV revenue and the numbers that would generate.
yeah.
So that's all. That's how they make their decisions.
And I think that, at least for the beginning of it, I think that any college football championship is going to have good ratings. I think you look at any big football game has just tremendous ratings. It's just football's king. That's just how it
Football
is.
king.
But of course, when you have a great
America has a never-ending hunger for sports.
Yeah. And I got into a discussion recently about the chance of the American Football League coming back, or the, what is it? The
USFL,
USFL.
XFL.
And people were like, oh, I'm an NFL for life. I don't, this ain't going to last. Like, why would somebody wish for a spring football league to fail? Why would you wish? So, for all the young guys that can't make it, when you look at the numbers, there's a lot of guys that don't make it to the NFL. So they're just sitting there. If you can give them more chance to develop, and even the guys that get cashed away from the NFL to develop, that makes football better as a whole. So I don't know if people were so quick to get on the NFL team and be like, oh, any other football league's lame. It's like, all football is good. It's all to build up the product, football. As long as football improves, why not?
I would ask those people their thoughts on Herschel Walker and Steve Young, because those were 2 products of different leagues and guys who excelled at the NFL as well. So
yeah,
it's great for football.
I believe Reggie White as well. But there's a lot of chance for that. And you see guys from the XFL that got to the NFL, and Ernest Johnson for the Browns had a big game. Kenny Robinson hasn't really developed into the player that the Panthers thought he was going to yet. PJ Walker is still on the roster, still got some playing time. But there's some guys from the XFL that have made some plays in the NFL. Now, whether they continue to, that's a different question. But anytime.
I'll also say that from a rule standpoint, the NFL actually adopted a lot of the different rules that were put into place as experimental rule changes to the NFL's rules in the XFL and the USFL. So again, I don't want to bring these up because I don't want to. Off the top of my head, I can't remember all of them. But for our viewers, I challenge you to do a little homework and go dig up the rule changes that have happened in the NFL because of other leagues, and it's changed the NFL itself and in a positive manner for the most part.
Yep. And you bring that up. It's a funny thing. The USFL is going to be using NFL rules, whereas the XFL didn't. And the Alliance of American Football, before that, they had their own set of rules. So they're using the NFL rules to essentially be a minor league. And that's something that has not existed for the NFL. I've always questioned why it doesn't exist. The logistics of having a consistent spring league and guys getting picked up and basically playing football year round, I understand the damage that can do to the body, but it also gives guys opportunities. It's not like baseball where it's going concurrently at the same time. That's not going to happen. These other leagues couldn't make any money off that. Unless, of course, those leagues were subsidized by the NFL, much like some of these minor league teams, obviously, but also WNBA, how they're able to only make profit because the NFL, the NBA pays for all of that. So there's a lot of things to look at here. I think it is good for football. I think that these types of things are worth it. I was even on the schedule, and we threw that in there. That was nice. That was nice. So before we go away from Michigan and Ohio State, talk about the college football stuff, there are some candidates for Heisman. Aiden Hutchinson is currently, at least on the Twitter polls that I've seen, leading the fan vote. Defensive players tend to always have a pretty high fan vote. I know C.J. Stroud is another one that's on there. Let's see. Do you know anybody off the top of your head before I look this up?
Bryce Young, um, Bryce Young's got to be in that discussion. Here's a name that a lot of people might not know about, but Bailey Zapp. I believe I don't think I'm butchering that name. Bailey Zapp plays for Western Kentucky. He has thrown for 4,968 passing yards, which is about 500 more than second place. He's thrown for 52 passing touchdowns, which is 12 more than Bryce Young, second place. He's the real deal.
Yep.
So that's somebody to keep an eye on. Bryce Young, second place in passing touchdowns. You got Kenny Pickett from Pittsburgh. Watched him play against Carolina. He's fifth in yards and third in touchdowns. So he definitely has a case. And then I will say Kenneth Walker, the running back from Michigan State, has had a tremendous year. And he's second in rushing yards, only behind Lewin Nichols of Central Michigan. And Kenneth Walker has 18 touchdowns, and that's second to only four other players. So doing it at Michigan State, having his Heisman moment against Michigan, there's some traction there.
Yeah, I think Jordan Davis has to be in the running at some point. He is that guy on that Georgia defense, that dominant Georgia defense. I don't know where he's going to end up in the Heisman vote. He's a defensive tackle. Last defensive tackle we've had up here probably was Ndamukong Suh.
He will probably win the position award for the best D tackle in the country.
I think that would be given at this point. He's a stud. But no, that Kentucky quarterback you brought up, when Georgia beat the daylights out of Kentucky, I looked at this quarterback. I said, he's got a pretty good arm. He's got a pretty good, solid, big arm. He's a big body for what it looked like. I don't know what
Western Kentucky.
Western Kentucky. Okay.
Zap. Yeah.
Okay. Well, anyway, the guy in Kentucky has a pretty good arm too. He's not very good, but he's an athletic, big body. But Western Kentucky. Let's see. Okay.
Well, and I'm looking right here at Aiden Hutchinson's stats. 12 games played, 13 sacks. That's hard to do at the collegiate level. I mean, that's Chase Young territory. That's Joey Bosa territory. that's really difficult to do. So,
Well,
and that comes where I mean he's been getting double teamed a lot. He's the number one X factor on that scouting report, and he's still able to make the impact that he has. He's got some help from David Ojabo on the other side. That was my big shout out several weeks ago as well as Hutchinson, but that Michigan D line is just so fun to watch.
now another one, similar production to Aiden Hutchinson, and don't hear enough people talk about him. I think it's because he's not draft eligible. That's Will Anderson for Alabama. That dude's a stud. He's a guy that I'm not sure if he's as athletic as Micah Parsons, but he kind of plays that role where he might drop back a little bit, but he's an edge rusher. He does a little bit of everything there. He's kind of a slender body, but he's not small. He's a tight, athletic body. Not that Aiden Hutchinson isn't.
6'4", 243.
Yeah. So he's
Will Anderson.
so he's got that similar size to Micah Parsons.
I didn't realize this, Caleb. He has 14 and a half sacks this year.
He's got a lot. He's got a lot of pressures, and
he's going to be playing on Sundays.
Oh, absolutely. But he's not draft eligible right now. Maybe that's why he's not in the Heisman talks so far, but I don't know why he wouldn't be.
That's a shame.
I think there's one thing that happens a lot with prospects in any situation is if they are surrounded by top players, like first-round draft picks all around them, that somehow takes away from their production, and I think that's unfair. It's like a quarterback being on a really good offense. Like, well, look at all the receivers he has. It's like, well, yeah, I'm sorry. Does that hurt him? He has all these guys to throw to. Does he not help them be better? I don't like the system arguments most times because it's just not fair. I mean, that shouldn't hurt somebody because of this. Talent is talent. And you look at the things that he does one-on-one, he's a stud. And next year, he might be the first edge rusher. So we'll see what happens looking at that. You got anything else to add for the college stuff before we move on?
I'm super bummed that Auburn didn't pull out the win against Bama in the Iron Bowl. We were watching that live, and just it just feels like Auburn beat themselves the last couple of minutes of that game. I don't understand deciding to pass in that situation when you have a quarterback with a bum ankle and you have the lead that you need. You literally just have to chew clock, and instead they turn the ball over and give Bama a breath of life, and you cannot give a team that good a sliver of hope because they're going to take that, they're going to run with it, and they're going to beat you, and that's exactly what Bama did.
Yep, and we watched that at a restaurant after the Appalachian State game. Big win over Georgia Southern, an injured Georgia Southern. But it was tough to focus on the game. I think you remember there was some sorority girls there that were very loud and very drunk. Made things a lot more difficult to focus on the game. Found out where they kept saying where they lived, though, so that was kind of cool. All right. The Cottages, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's definitely where they live.
Well, actually, let's carry on with the college stuff while we're here. Let's talk about the coaching carousel. So there's some big names that changed, and Lincoln Riley. That's one of the coolest contracts I've ever seen. Like, this is just I don't think I knew this was legal, but I guess anything's legal in college football now. So in his contract, he gets however many millions, like 10, 15 million, whatever he's making per year, to go to USC, this premier location, even if they've been down and out for a long while. We'll talk about the impact that's going to have. They're going to buy his old house in Oklahoma for over $500,000 over the market value. Then they're going to buy him a house around USC.
A $6 million house.
A $6 million house that isn't coming out of his paycheck, that he's also still getting paid whatever he's getting paid. 24-hour access to a private jet and probably a helicopter, too, in L.A.
The $6 million for that LA house is out of USC's pocket, so he doesn't have to touch his 110 million that they're giving him to purchase a house. I mean,
Yeah. And a $6 million house in
that's
LA
just
is probably a
absurd.
condo, but still, $6 million, $6 million. But no, it's definitely going to be a great situation. And people talked about when it first broke, the news first broke. They said, "Well, why would he leave Oklahoma to go to USC?" And many said, "Well, it's probably just a quality of life thing. He's got a family, wants to go to this California setting." But then I don't think anyone had any question once the contract came out. They said, "Oh, okay, that's why he's going, obviously." Uh, but what a what a change! Have we had a big coaching change like this? When's the last time we had a big coaching change like this big?
Well, Urban Meyer to Ohio State was a big change, but I believe Urban Meyer stepped down from Florida for 2 years in between jobs. The last time that someone made the switch, didn't Saban go from LSU straight to Bama?
I think so, but this is
I was very young when that happened, but if so, then that might be an equivalent
no, because
comparison.
he went to Miami and then he went to Bama, right? That was the whole thing. Is he went to Miami Dolphins, and
Maybe so.
shortly thereafter he got the offer and left. I'm pretty sure. I was also pretty young when this happened,
Let me
but
give it a quick Google.
that's how I think things went. So I can't remember the last big coaching change. You talk about Urban Meyer, but that again has its own little caveats there. Like this is a big coaching. You just don't see this very often. And we saw two pretty big names. Lincoln Riley, the biggest name change. We'll talk about Notre Dame after this, but let's the impact this is going to have on college football could be huge. And I hope it works out because I don't like when things bust because that's just not fun. But if he can go to USC, a premier program from the past that has been down and out for a while, they haven't been able to be consistent. They get a 5-star recruit immediately to transfer away from Oklahoma to
And
USC.
several since then. They
Yeah,
just keep piling in.
and
5-star quarterback, 5-star running back. They're getting tons of talent.
California is a hotbed. And now they say, oh, USC's back. So USC could come back and have a real blue blood again. They could be back to what it was on the West Coast from our childhood, And now I really want to see Texas come back. I want to see them come
Reggie
back,
Bush and Matt Leinart, and I mean the Trojans. They had a good
like
run
some of those Pete Carroll
with Pete
days.
Carroll. Yeah. You know, if you're Lincoln Riley, it kind of makes a ton of sense to do this. Oklahoma's going to the SEC. I don't think that anybody thinks that's going to go very well. I don't think that Lincoln Riley thought to himself, okay, yeah, we'll make the transition to the SEC and we'll still win 10 games a year and make the CFP. I don't think that many people think that that's attainable whenever they're struggling in the Big 12 as is. And so going to USC, the level of expectation is high, but not as high as it is at a place like LSU. Plus, the conference that he's playing in, you're going to have some pushback from Utah. You're going to have some pushback from Oregon. At times, Washington has a good program put together. Um, UCLA, your big rival, is a solid program. Um, but I don't think that any of those teams can trump USC when the Trojans are firing on all cylinders and there is that forward momentum that you see so often in college sports to where I honestly feel like if Lincoln Riley can build a couple of winning seasons that bring hope and bring a rejuvenation to that program these next 2 or 3 years, you can see them establish themselves as a very dominant program with a clear path to success, being the West Coast version of Bama. I'm not saying they're going to win 5 or 6 national titles. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is on the East Coast, if you're a 5-star guy and you live in North Carolina or Georgia or wherever in the Southeast, Bama is the penultimate goal. It is the absolute, the mecca of college football. But if you're a West Coast guy and you're a 5-star recruit, specifically say a 5-star receiver out of California, and your option is to go all the way across the country to Alabama and play for Nick Saban, or you have the option to stay in your home state of California and play for an outstanding program, not have to go through the Auburns and the LSUs of the world to be able to make it to the conference championship and into the national championship. That's appealing. That's really appealing to a lot of people. So I'm super excited for this hire.
And I think you'd mentioned some of the teams on the West Coast that could be rivals to USC. I think the success for USC probably is going to happen pretty quick. I think if they can get the talent, the one thing that USC hasn't had, they've had a lot of talent over the past few years. Even go back to Juju, players like that. They've had players go to the pros every single year. It's not like they don't have the talent. They just haven't had the quarterback. They haven't had any consistency at quarterback since, Sam Darnold? That's the last real consistent quarterback they've had. And now you're going to get just a crap ton of quarterbacks coming in just because of Lincoln Riley and that system, which benefits quarterbacks a lot. So I think that is big for USC. He also didn't mention Oregon. And Oregon could be seeing an uptick in their production. They had a pretty solid year this year, a couple of big wins. But with the NIL, we've talked about, could the Nike connection help Oregon succeed going further? Something to look at as far as a competitor to USC. I think that if all goes the way that people are expecting, USC is going to be back to blue blood status pretty quickly. And I think that's good for college football. And that's good to see after USC dropped off, and it really kind of begs the question. This happens every now and then in college football. Teams drop off and they come back into the spotlight. Who's the next team that you think could drop off, just like USC did?
That's tough. I mean, I hate to use Oklahoma in that same conversation, but it's hard to imagine a situation where Oklahoma makes the move to the SEC and doesn't have Lincoln Riley leading them into the Southeastern Conference and them having the type of success they've had in the Big 12. It's not that I don't think Oklahoma can be a good team in the SEC. It's just it's going to be very rare for Oklahoma to have another 10-win season, 11-win season, and make the CFP once they make that move to a bigger conference with much, much deeper talent. Having to play teams like Texas A&M and that be like the 4th toughest game on your conference schedule is brutal. And it just doesn't look great for that program right now. You'll get the big revenue from joining that conference, but as far as wins go, that's a little concerning. I think that Clemson with Dabo, I think they're going to bounce back. I think it's just a situation where they lost a lot, and some of the games that they played in this year, specifically the Georgia game to begin the season, just didn't go their way, and they were just a couple of pieces too shy of being able to pull out wins. But Oklahoma's who I would probably say.
Yeah, and have you seen what Bob Stoops has been doing as the interim coach? So since he was named the interim coach with Riley leaving, he has already spent 18 hours on recruiting trips. Something he doesn't necessarily have to do as an interim guy, which does tell me that he might be more than an interim guy going forward for at least the short term, filling in and going in and playing that. But him on recruiting trips is pretty good because he's a legendary coach, and he's able to get guys in. So that's not going to have a drop off there. Not too much. There is a little bit of a drop off, but it's still pretty impactful having him there. So we'll see. It is a tough conference to go into. But then again, once you get into that conference, you're also recruiting SEC talent. So someone who's recruiting trips was in Texas as well. So just being in an SEC conference helps bring in other guys. So that's something to look into. But it is going to be tough. Having a lot of change that quickly is going to be tough. I don't know who I would think. Clemson's my first thought, but Clemson and Alabama show there's two ways of handling things. Alabama has prolonged success, and Bama and Nick Saban loses assistant coaches left and right. Whereas Clemson, they keep the majority of their coaches that they've had since Deshaun Watson. They don't have much turnover. So because of that, I don't think it's going to be them. Maybe something happens with Michigan. I don't know what Harbaugh's status is. The big surprise would be Ohio State crumbling and falling apart, just not being able to hit on recruits, much like
Hard
USC.
to see that happening, though.
Yeah, it's hard to see that, but it was hard to see USC fall off. All it takes is a few bad classes of recruits, and that's the real big thing.
Real quick before we go to the next segment, did you see the quote where somebody had asked Harbaugh what he thought about him getting the first win against Ohio State, and he said, well, some people hit a triple, or excuse me, some people start their life standing on third base and they think they hit a triple. Basically just dissing Ryan Day and saying, like, you inherited this crazy good program. I had to kind of build it back. So it's different, him getting wins versus Harbaugh getting wins. I just thought that was kind of a witty quote.
Yeah, witty or petty, one of the two. But
that too.
Now, one of the things that it's tough to be a Jim Harbaugh fan from some of the personality things that he's had in the past. Some people like that, I guess. But he did do one thing that I found, which is pretty cool. I don't know if you know about this. But he changed his contract for this year to be almost entirely incentive-based. And he ends up making it all back because they've had a really good season in the playoffs, most likely. That's pretty cool. But then he also took that money that he had earned in incentive-based and he gave it to his assistant coaches because they had to take a 20% pay cut because of COVID. That's pretty cool. He didn't have to do that.
Absolutely.
That's pretty cool. And we really have one more thing on this college football segment before we move on. Honestly, we spend a lot of time on college football. But Brian Kelly, Notre Dame. From what I've heard, and I've pieced together a bunch of different stories, I don't know exactly what is true and what isn't. And it's the nature of the beast. It's what the game is. It's just how it goes. But I've heard stories where one of his coordinators is kind of blasting him because one of his coordinators was on a recruiting trip when he got the notification on his phone that he was going to work somewhere else. He's going to go to LSU. I get it. It's tough to tell, hey, I'm going to be moving, going here. I'm going to be going there. It's tough. But then you hear the story that when he addressed the team, he talked to him for like 11 minutes and left. The optics look really bad. It's a business. It's just the way it is. But it looks really bad. You have the OC, Reese, talking to the team and having his heart felt like, hey, I'm not leaving. I'm going to stay here. Let's go win this championship. Let's keep going, this and that. It's pretty cool. But it's a weird thing because on one hand, people like to bash players for sitting out of bowl games. But some of those same people don't want to bash the coaches for leaving midway through. Now, I don't think either should be bashed because it's a business decision. If you want to sit out of the bowl game because you're afraid you might get hurt, cool. Go for it. That's your money. There's no malice towards your team. It's just what it is. This is your future livelihood.
Yeah, I can't fathom getting upset at a player for wanting to keep his financial well-being intact. Thinking about Carolina last year, if a guy like a Javonte Williams or Michael Carter goes out there and tears his ACL against A&M in their bowl game, their draft stock plummets, their NFL career is all of a sudden in jeopardy. And if they don't come back from that injury well, then they might have cheated themselves out of generational wealth. So, when you play for a team for 3 or 4 years, give your all every Saturday for 36 to 50 games. Um, you're asking to sit out one game to organize your future, and people can't give you that nod of approval. I don't. I've never understood that.
Yeah, on the coaching aspect, you would like to imagine that all these adults are doing their best to inform people of what's about to happen. There's some things you can't talk about contractually, so there's certain things you just can't say, hey, I'm talking to this team, this or that. Media gets a hold of that. That's a big mess. So I understand that. It is a shame that it happens because these are still young men that are having their lives shaken up by this. It's an unfortunate circumstance. I don't necessarily think that Brian Kelly's a bad person for this. I don't really know him. I don't know any other stories about him. I've heard some. Again, I don't know if they're true. That seem to say that he's not that great of a dude, but I don't know. And I think that LSU, we'll see what happens there. Notre Dame's still in the mix for a potential playoff bid this year, depending on how things go. So we'll see what happens.
I can't see Notre Dame getting in. I can't see a scenario where they get in.
It's a long shot. It's like we talked about. Oklahoma State makes more sense, but they are technically still alive. So we got a couple minutes here to go over the NFL stuff. We didn't really have a lot of the games to go over since we just had so many games to look at over the past couple weeks. But the LA Rams are slumping. They don't look great. Now, that being said, Stafford hasn't looked great, but the receivers are not in a good place. Woods is out for the year. Odell keeps holding his back after every route. And you got Cooper Kupp, who's really their only consistent target. Their tight ends are okay. The offensive line's okay, but they really just are struggling to produce on offense. And that is a struggle, and that is the highlight of your team. Von Miller is having some pressures. Aaron Donald's playing well, of course. Jalen Ramsey's playing well. Not so well against Devontae Adams this past week. But I think they have to be able to start turning it around towards the end because I don't see the Seahawks winning the division. I don't see the Niners winning the division. Niners more so than the Seahawks, but even then I think the Rams straighten up and win it. The Cardinals are one to look at, but they've also been off their game a little bit. So, interested to see how that division ends up. The way it would look like at the beginning of the year as possibly being the best division in football. Not so much right now. A lot of bad things happened. The Patriots, which I talked about at the beginning of the year as possibly being an opportunity for the Patriots to get back to form. They are getting back to form. They're very hot. Mac Jones is playing really, really well. And I think we joked about it, and we probably shouldn't have joked about it. It makes us look stupid now. We joked about him being the Rookie of the Year early on. Looks like he might actually have a chance to vie for that award, the way they're playing. And
I would say he's probably the front runner.
You have to think, right? So, looking at that, that's big. Another one to look at would be Jamar Chase for the Bengals. The Bengals picked up a big win beating the Steelers, stomping the Steelers. Makes you think, are these Bengals for real? Sure looks like it. It sure looks like these Bengals are pushing to try to take a hold of this division. And on the other side of the division, you had the Ravens, the Browns, playing a game that I think you said it best. It's like you're watching a Big 12, was it? Big 12 game?
It was, I mean, so every once in a while you just watch a primetime game where it seems like neither team wants to win. Neither team, like, it's almost like the Monstars from Space Jam came and took their powers before the game. That was definitely one of those situations.
Yeah, it was ugly. It was just pitiful. I talked to some people that say, I just turned it off. It's just ugly. It's a little bit like a preseason game where they're just like, all right, let's just air it out. Let's just see what you can do here. They're just throwing it around here. It's crazy. I didn't expect that. That was a marquee game that I was putting on the calendar. This is going to be a good one. I was like, oh, this is awful. This might be the worst game of the season. I think the Jets-Jaguars matchup would be better than this. But
Yeah, it was ugly from start to
yeah,
finish. I think Lamar had 4 interceptions in that game. Not ideal.
not great, not great. And also Jack Conklin being got injured in that game. That's uh, not great. Did you see the injury?
Yeah,
That video of him walking and phew, hate to see that. That's
yeah.
hate to see anybody go down, but Conklin playing so well, that offensive line looks so good, and getting hurt. There's a you just hate seeing it. So now I think we have to move on to our big boys. We got a few minutes here to talk about this. If anybody's stuck around or you happen to hop in here, thank you for hopping in and watching and bearing with my cold I have because my nose is all stuffed up, so I sound like I'm talking like this to my mouth. Thank you for tuning in. Hopefully you've liked what you heard. Big college episode today. Like, subscribe for more episodes and more goodness. We'll be back every week for the most part, except for some holidays, just how it turns out. So big boy shout outs. One in the NFL, both in the NFL actually. And they're really big plays. I just love to see it. And one of them is an offensive lineman's dream. So Andrew Thomas, a rookie that I love when he came out. I said he was going to be a pretty safe pick, and then he didn't have the rookie year I expected. And then he's only gotten better as time has gone on. It's the opposite of a sophomore slump, as you mentioned the other day. He's playing really, really well on that team. And this past week, he caught a touchdown pass. And he didn't just catch it like a fumble it and then bring it to your chest. He snagged it. He threw it, fingertips, boom, full extension, brought it in, touchdown. It was beautiful. My heart, I was like, oh, this is great. It is a dream. Every offensive lineman dreams of that moment. And it was awesome. It was awesome to see. And another big dream for a defensive lineman came true on a blocked field goal for Seattle. They blocked the field goal. Seattle's defensive lineman picks it up. Rasheem Green, still a young player, defensive lineman, defensive tackle, I believe is where they play him. He picks it up, takes it all the way back for a touchdown. I believe it was a field goal. If it would have been an extra point, obviously for 2 points. But he takes that either way, no matter how many points it's worth, runs the whole field, got some blockers around him, and dream come true, scores the touchdown. Beautiful. Gotta love that. Gotta love those big man's dreams coming true.
Yeah, as someone who played football for I think 9 years, right? 1, 2, 3, 9 years. I never scored a touchdown. So always something that I wanted to do. We would do Oklahoma drill in middle school and high school, and just being able to hold a football and truck people was a dream of mine. And so watching Andrew Thomas score that touchdown was awesome. The joy that it brought me living vicariously through Andrew Thomas, it was unreal. So on to my big shout outs for this week. I'm going to go college on the offensive side of the ball and cover a super versatile, super dependable lineman for the Aggies of Texas A&M. We're talking about Kenyon Green.
Love this guy.
This is a guy that is 6'4", 325, super wide frame, the type of guy that would have to turn sideways to walk through a door frame. He's going to be coveted in the NFL draft because of his position variability. Like he has started every position on the Texas A&M offensive line other than center. So having that position versatility, being able to play guard, being able to play tackle, reminds me a lot of Elgton Jenkins of the Packers. Definitely think that could be a potential comp for him. He's projected to go first round in the NFL draft. We'll see how he tests in the combine and at his pro day, but definitely a guy to keep your eye on if you're into watching the Hogmollies. His dad, Henry Green, played at Grambling State, and his mom, Shalona played volleyball at UCLA, so comes from an athletic family. So that's interesting as well. On the defensive side of the ball, I'm going to go with a crafty veteran who had really a big stretch of games here. We've been gone for 2 weeks because of Thanksgiving, and on November 21st against Baltimore, Robert Quinn, defensive end of the Bears, had 3.5 sacks and 4 tackles, and then turned right around 4 days later against Detroit on short rest and had a sack and 4 tackles in that game against Detroit. So Robert Quinn is, I want to say he's 31, 32 years old, a guy who's been around for a while. He's kind of jumped around to different teams. I will always hold an affinity in my heart for Robert Quinn because of what he did at Carolina. But somebody who can lead a defensive line and kind of set the example as an edge rusher, and some of the most cerebral hand techniques with certain jabs and some of the stunts that he does on the defensive line that I've seen in the NFL in quite some time. So good to see that he is still putting on for Chicago.
Yeah, and the UNC thing has nothing to do with it, right?
Has nothing to do with it. I'm the least biased person in football podcast media.
Right. Self-proclaimed unbiased. But I'm glad you mentioned the Elton Jenkins thing for the Packers. That is a pretty good comparison there. Another guy that didn't work out was Greg Robinson, is a guy that played a lot of different positions. He's more of a body type matchup for Kenyon Green. Hopefully he has more success. Robinson's biggest issue is they never really got him settled into any position, so he just kept floating around and couldn't really progress in anything. So that's something to look out for. But good shout-outs. Got to love the big guys. We have a couple of games to look at here for the NFL. So the two biggest games that I saw, there's some other ones that could end up being better, like earlier in the season when we said, oh, there's no good games this week. Oh, wow, a lot of good games. So there's always the possibility of that happening. The two biggest games that I saw was the Chargers at Cincinnati. Big game. Cincinnati for real. Can the Chargers get it back on track? Big game. And probably the biggest game with the most drastic ramifications from this game would be the Bills and Patriots. That's a big game. One that could potentially decide who wins the division. And
one that could dictate the seeding in the AFC playoff picture.
It's both playoff pictures are kind of open right now. There's a lot of things happening that we didn't expect earlier in the season. That's what makes the NFL great. But Buffalo, New England, this is going to be great. This might be one of the best years to watch these two teams face off against each other. They're both really good right now. And this is one that will show just how good each of these teams are going forward. And at the highest stakes, that's one that I am most definitely going to be watching from start to finish.
I think this is one of the best Bills teams we've seen since the 90s, since Jim Kelly. And so it's awesome that that's a Monday night primetime game. I'm really looking forward to that one. Again, with the Chargers and Bengals, two teams with super young quarterbacks. They're both kind of trying to solidify themselves in the playoff hunt. And so that is spot on, going to be one of the better games of the evening. Couple more just to keep your eye on. Baltimore does play at Pittsburgh. That's one of the more storied rivalries in football, specifically since the turn of the century. And Denver plays at Kansas City Sunday Night Football. Anytime you can watch Patrick Mahomes go to work in prime time, I highly recommend it. Denver's had a pretty solid year. Teddy Bridgewater's been pretty solid for them, and they're trying to. I mean, they're 6-5. They could still squeak into the playoffs.
Now, Surtain had a pretty solid week last week too.
He has a knack for pick sixes. Um, very Ed Reed like, where if he gets the interception, look out. You better tackle him. Super elusive once he gets the ball in his hands.
Yeah. Definitely that's another one to bring up. Definitely to talk about. Okay. Well, that was a good episode. I enjoyed the conversations we had, and there's more we could talk about with college football as things get closer and closer and things start getting closer and closer to the end. We'll definitely be talking about college football. And then, of course, right around the corner, we got the NFL wrapping up. So I might try to
Two
get.
things before we leave.
You're messing up my end roll, man.
Two things. I've got to say this. First of all, shout out to Vita Vea losing a tooth during the game. Blood is rushing down his chin, and he's just smiling. I mean, the dude is just a freak. Like, just he could be losing an arm, and he would still be out there. You would have to drag him off the field. So a lot of respect for that. Veda is a certified Hogmolly, and if you haven't done so yet, I challenge all of our listeners to go watch the TED Talk that Alex Smith gave about dealing with depression and anxiety, kind of off of his injury and just being drafted as highly as he was. It's only about 13, 14 minutes long. Highly recommend that. So go check that out.
Yeah, I love Alex
And
Smith.
be sure to like and subscribe our videos on YouTube. We really appreciate it.
Really do appreciate it. Follow us on Twitter. Share a lot of things on Twitter as well. One of the things we did share didn't get trending. I thought it would, but hashtag Trench Tough with Vita Vea losing a tooth really should have went trending. So we'll have to try that again one day. I do think that's a pretty good one. If nothing else, we'll make a T-shirt about it. Who knows? All right. If you stuck through this or you just hopped in, thank you for watching. Like, subscribe. We'll be back next week, the week after that, the week after that, probably the week after that. Thank you for watching. Hogmolly Hustle is out.